In the Caribbean Sea, two Venezuelan F-16 Fighting Falcons roared in low, cutting across the sky just a few hundred feet above the waves. It was the USS Jason Dunham, a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer bristling with sensors and missiles. On radar, the blips appeared fast, closing the distance. The bridge of the American warship knew exactly a game of chicken, except this one involved supersonic jets and billion-dollar hardware. The Pentagon later called the move reckless, but for the sailors standing watch on the destroyer, labels didn't matter. All they knew was that the two Cold War-era fighters were charging toward them, wanted to show strength, to remind Washington that their afterburners glowing like torches in the Caribbean sky, that Caracas couldn't be intimidated after a U.S. strike sank a suspected cartel-run speedboat just days earlier. But in choosing this stunt, his pilots were about to learn the hard way, intimidation cuts both ways. Because while they thought they were sending a message, they had no idea that they were handing the U.S. The F-16s came in hot, banking low enough that their shockwaves rippled across the water. On the bridge of the Jason Dunham, every sailor knew the drill. Standard procedure. Stay calm. The first warning came over the radio. A calm American voice transmitted on open frequencies. Unidentified aircraft. You are approaching a United States operating in international waters. Maintain safe distance. The Venezuelan pilots gave no response. Instead, one of them lit his afterburner, blasting past the bow in a streak of orange flame. Inside the Combat Information Center, the real fight was already underway. The ship's ANSPY-1 radar, the beating heart of the Aegis, had tagged the incoming jets long before the crew even saw them. Data scrolled across the consoles: altitude, speed, bearing. Weapons officers armed the ship's layered defense suite, 162 Sea Sparrows for close-in interception, and the last line, the Phalanx Sea Whiz Gatling gun. If the Venezuelan fighters made a wrong move, the destroyer wasn't the goal. The captain stood calm, arms crossed, eyes on the tactical display. His orders were clear. Do not escalate unless directly threatened. The Jason Dunham was in international waters with every right to be there. The real danger wasn't the aircraft themselves. It was the possibility of one miscalculation spiraling into an international incident. It looked like Venezuela had won the intimidation game, but in reality, the opposite was true. Every radio call that the pilots made back to Caracas, every sweep of their radar, every flicker of their targeting systems, it was all being soaked up by the Jason Dunham's electronic warfare suite. The closer they flew, the more they revealed. The Venezuelans thought they were flexing. What they didn't realize was that they had already stepped into America's data trap. The USS Jason Dunham wasn't just any ship. She's an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, essentially a floating fortress. Her radar dome, the ANSPY or ANSPY-1, can track hundreds of targets at once, from sea-skimming missiles to high-flying jets. For the crew, a pair of F-16s buzzing the deck barely registered as a threat compared to what the ship was built to fight. So the question is, why was the Navy even here in the first place in Venezuelan waters? Well, the answer goes back just days, not even months. On September 2nd, American aircraft had destroyed a speedboat in the Caribbean, accusing it of belonging to Venezuela's powerful Tren de Aragua cartel. 11 were killed in that strike. The incident was viewed very differently. President Nicolas Maduro condemned the attack as a violation of sovereignty, vowing retaliation. Just days later, his F-16s were screaming across the Caribbean sky. Ironically, those very jets were once supplied to Venezuela by the United States. Back in the 1980s, Venezuela purchased dozens of F-16ABs. 4 decades later, the fleet is showing its age. Spare parts are scarce, avionics are outdated, and maintenance is a constant struggle. Still, in Maduro's hands, they became symbols of defiance. Fast, loud, and dramatic, even if no longer truly modern. That contrast couldn't have been sharper. On one side, Cold War relics straining to look menacing. On the other, a destroyer tied into one of the most advanced naval networks on Earth, supported by satellites, drones, and a full carrier strike group nearby. From the outside, the F-16s looked like they held the upper hand, but the reality was different. The closer they flew, the more they exposed. The Venezuelans' F-16s gave it all away. Their fire control radars painted the Jason Dunham trying to look threatening. Instead, they handed over precise radios lit up with chatter back to coastal bases. The ship's AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare system soaked it all, logging which frequencies were used and even the exact moment the pilots keyed how secure the comms were and the infrared. By diving low and blasting afterburners, the fighters left massive thermal trailers in the humid Caribbean air. The destroyer's IR sensors captured it all. It was like photographing fingerprints at a crime scene. Priceless, undeniable evidence, but the intimidation at close range is noisy. Electronic battle space, noise is death. Every flare, every radar ping, every afterburner burst wasn't scaring the US. It was feeding its databases. Victory to jets screaming over US warship defiant and bold. But the from Norfolk or Pearl Harbor saw something else entirely. They saw cataloged weaknesses and completed a library of Venezuela's aging air fleet being delivered on a silver platter. By the time the F-16s finally banked away, the Jason Dunham's crew hadn't even flinched. Those pilots thought they had rattled America's cage, they had actually opened the door to something more dangerous. Escalation. The flyovers might have looked like theatrics, but Washington didn't laugh. Within hours, the Pentagon labeled the incident as reckless and provocative. And that wasn't empty talk. Just days later, 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters arrived in Puerto Rico. Just a 2-hour flight from Venezuelan airspace. These weren't aging jets from the 1980s. These were America's crown jewel. Fifth-generation enemy defenses before the first warning siren even sounds. Their deployment was a signal. If Caracas wanted to gamble in the skies, the stakes had just gone up. Meanwhile, the Jason Dunham wasn't alone. Behind her stood the weight of an entire U.S. Navy task force. Destroyers overhead, P-8 Poseidon's patrol aircraft scanned the waters, while drones watched from higher still. One destroyer might look isolated on the horizon, but in reality, it was plugged into a layered shield stretching across. For Venezuela, that created a brutal imbalance. Their F-16s could buzz, maybe even harass, but they couldn't change the facts. Their Air Force lacked modern missiles, lacked stealth, and lacked the logistics to sustain a long fight. If they wanted to, matching American firepower was impossible. And yet, provocation has a dangerous logic. The situation could have gone from noise to a shooting war in seconds. The U.S. destroyer's crew knew it. The Venezuelan pilots probably felt it in their cockpits too. A game of chicken is only fun until someone doesn't swerve. Maduro may have hoped the flyovers would rally domestic pride and send Washington a warning. Instead, they triggered the exact opposite. A surge of U.S. military presence in the Caribbean. Off against the U.S. Navy, there's one rule that never changes. Don't mistake restraint for weakness. From the outside, Venezuela's flyovers looked like defiance. Jets roaring past a U.S. destroyer, daring America to react. But scratch beneath the surface, and it was a textbook case of overconfidence turning into self-sabotage. Strategically, the hunt handed Washington everything it wanted. The Navy collected radar fingerprints, comms protocols, and thermal data from Venezuela's most capable fighters without firing a single shot. In military terms, that's a jackpot. Intelligence like this isn't flashy, but in crisis, it can mean the difference between surprise and dominance. This wasn't the first time an adversary made the same mistake. Just months ago in the South China Sea, A Chinese Z-10 attack helicopter tried to MH-60R. Instead, it handed over electronic signature that American analysts stored away for future conflicts. Houthi fighters launched a missile at a Navy Seahawk, expecting a propaganda victory. Instead, they exposed their tactics, got tracked, and lost their launch site in seconds. Different actors, same story. For Caracas, the lesson is brutal. Against an Aegis-equipped destroyer, it's just background noise. Worse, it undercuts Venezuela's strategic position. Instead of looking strong, it highlights weakness. Aging aircraft against a fleet designed for global war. Every pass over a U.S. warship becomes another data point in America's growing library of adversary playbooks. And for Washington, the takeaway is just as clear. Stay calm. Escalation isn't always about pulling the trigger. Sometimes the smartest move is to wait, listen, and collect everything your opponent is foolish enough to broadcast. Because in modern warfare, silence wins battles, and arrogance loses them. By the time the Venezuelan F-16s turned for home, the Jason Dunham hadn't changed course, hadn't fired a missile, and hadn't flinched. To the sailors on board, it was just a ship's log. But to analysts watching the data streams, it was gold. Venezuela had tried to rattle the cage. It ended up rattling itself. The lesson is simple. The side that stays calm usually wins. Flybys, flares, and chest thumping don't change the balance of power. What matters is the ability to turn noise into knowledge. And on that score, the U.S. Navy walked away with the upper hand without even breaking a sweat. But here's the real question. If you were standing on the bridge of that destroyer watching two supersonic fighters dive low across your bow, what would you have done? Would you have fired a warning shot? Or held steady and trusted your ship's defenses? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to see how you'd handle it. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like directly, join the fleet. You get loyalty badges, priority responses, and you'll help us break.
Saronic Technologies is building something the U.S. Navy hasn't had in speed. Real industrial speed. Port Alpha is America's first naval shipyard designed to mass-produce autonomous warships, and it's already in motion. Valuation of $4 billion. Saronic is delivering vessels faster than any traditional defense contractor in the game. No delays, no bottlenecks. Surface combatants, engineered to deploy without crews, without hangars, and without the need to ever go dark. The logic is simple. China has numbers, America needs speed. While Beijing pushes out over 350 ships, Port Alpha is being built without waiting a decade. Modular construction, AI-driven production lines, naval autonomy built for... The Navy isn't treating this experiment. These ships are entering real-world contracts. They're preparing for the Pacific. This is Port Alpha, one vessel at a time. 6 feet of trouble that fits where manned boats can't. Think pocket-sized picket ship. Slip it off a beach, kick it from a RHIB, or run it as a wolf pack and watch comms nets light up. Spyglass hauls up to 40 pounds, sprints at 20 knots, and roams 30 nautical miles, enough for harbor denial, pierside mischief, or swarming reconnaissance that makes a patrol boat's watch officer spit his coffee. It's small, modular, and recoverable by larger ships. One crate, one problem solved. Origin story matters. A former naval officer built the first unit in a garage to prove Spyglass became Saronic's calling card. Real hull, real autonomy, real missions. Showing the Navy that startup cadence can produce useful combat power. Why size wins. At 6 feet, Spyglass noses into mangrove cuts, marina alleys, pier shadows. Bigger holes get shy, and sensors get noisy. Launch from shore, a workboat, or a mothership, recover, refit, and relaunch within it. Speed meets survival. 20 knots in a tiny hull is lively. Reposition behind harbor traffic. Ingress, snoop, sting, exfil. Without theater. Punch above weight. 40 pounds buys options. EO/IR for target ID. Compact EW to poke comms. A demolition charge for piers or prop fouling. Even a loitering round when back off needs punctuation. Quick in, clean out. 5. Cutlass. the bigger brother with sharper elbows. Feet, 200 pounds of payload, and a 300 nautical mile reach means Cutlass stops being a demo toy and starts acting like a network node. It can seed smaller drones, build an adaptive command and control mesh, and classify or track surface nasties while staying outside the splash zone. Same 20-knot top end, far longer legs, 10 times spyglass's range. What the frame buys you, autonomy with eyesight. Cutlass carries its own mast and radar, so it doesn't just take orders. It sees, tracks, classifies, get thread without a human babysitter. The brains ride in a microservices stack with which means payloads swap like phone apps. EO/IR today, EW tomorrow, loitering munition rack on Friday. Proven mischief. In joint drills like IBP 24.1, Cutlass launched Altius loitering munitions at sea. Mid-ocean, clean handoff, no fuss. That's not a science fair. That's a float missile caddy, doing work in blue water. Operator cadence is simple. Launch from a pier or mothership, roll a corridor at 20 knots, seed sensors, pass tracks, and, if the word comes, pop a loitering bird. Recover, swap the box, send it back. Cutlass is the middleweight that holds the ring. Too small to tempt a missile shot, too useful to ignore, and perfectly rude to anything that wanders into its lane. 4. Corsair. 4 feet of multi-mission attitude. Corsair goes past 35 knots, carries roughly 1,000 pounds, and stretches beyond 1,000 nautical miles. Real persistence and proper punch. Shadow a frigate. Or park a surprise under someone's horizon. What the frame buys you. Depth and endurance. With 1,000 nautical miles in the tank, Corsair graduates from beach work to blue water. It can sit on station for days, patrol a sea lane end to end, or hand off between task groups without begging a tow. The hull is built around a modular bay. Rack the kit you need, from sonar arrays and EO/IR masts to compact EW sets, radar packages, or a lightweight offensive rack. On one run, Corsair plays quartermaster, slinging spares, fuel canisters, even a full parts locker to a unit that can't break station. Next run, it grows a fake mustache and does decoy work, towing emitters and radar reflectors to puff a bigger signature enemy's targeting cycle. Flip the loadout, and it's a strike caddy, carrying loitering munitions, ready to pop a bird the second a track turns hostile, while the mothership keeps its VLS cells politely closed. When the job is quiet, it goes sensor dragger, streaming a sonar, laying buoys, stitching a real-time picket line across the water. And when you need a shadow, Corsair tucks in at 35+ knots, pacing a frigate, and keeping eyes on contact sniffing just beyond the horizon. 3. Mirage. Ship-sized silhouettes. 40 feet long and comfortable, operating like a man craft for broad tasking, maritime security, picket duty, deception ops, or escort in a mixed crewed-uncrewed screen. Mirage has 2,000 nautical miles in the tank, tops 35+ knots, and can lug up to 2,000 pounds of bang if the brief turns kinetic. It's the kind of platform you assign sectors to, not errands. Pair 2 of them and they write their own patrol pattern, while your destroyer keeps its magazines fresh. What the frame buys you is command presence without the crew bill. Mirage runs the same browser-based command layer kit, a medium radar array for surface tracking, a tall EO/IR mast for positive IDs, compact EW for signals deception, or a rack of loitering munitions when observe and report needs teeth. In escort, it runs wingman, mirroring turns at 35+ knots, and handing off threats to shooters with the calm of a croupier. Mirages become a habit. 3 become a net. They cross-queue, trade tracks, and rotate station on that 2,000 nautical mile leash, so your high-value hulls keep fuel, crews, and the fight that matters. Sector assigned, sector secured. Cypher isn't a boat. It's a quiet problem set for anyone watching the plot board. It swallows a full 20-foot ISO container, plugs it to ship power, and moves the kit you'd rather not risk sailors on. Comms, EW, medical, spares, even a pallet of drones. Table, length, 60 feet, approximately 18 meters. Top speed, 35+ knots, approximately 65 kilometers per hour. Range, 3,000 nautical miles, approximately 5,500 kilometers. Payload, 10,000 pounds, 4.5 metric tons. And yes, it handles a standard 20-foot ISO. No bespoke racks, no drama. So whatever lives in a container can live on Cypher. Baiju is industrial utility at fleet speed. A lot of cargo hulls plod. Cypher runs with frigates, changes sectors between dawn and lunch, and threads into places a replenishment ship won't. Roll-on NEW can, a sensor lab, a drone magazine, same browser-based control and mission-level AI as the smaller hulls. So you don't teach a new dog old tricks. Just scale the payload and hit deploy. How it plays out at sea. In contested waters, Cypher is the ghost forklift. It sprints ahead of the convoy, caches fuel bladders and parts to hand off a strike package from its container bay. It runs repair kits to a damaged patrol craft without costing you a crew transfer. Shadows a task group at 35+ knots, acting as a roaming magazine for loitering munitions and a relay tower for the swarm. After a cyclone, it shows up with a medical ISO, generators humming, and clean water gear in the other half of the bay. This is Marauder, 150 feet of unmanned persuasion, range about 3,500 nautical miles, around 18 knots top speed, payload measured in 40 metric tons, and deck space for two 40-foot ISOs, or four 20-footers. You can float missiles, radar kits, fuel bladders, repair shops, an entire pop-up mission module into places a carrier group won't risk. Park it on a choke point, lend it to a task force, or let it play quartermaster for your unmanned phalanx. When the brief says heavy, Marauder says how much. What the frame buys you is industrial leverage. Most logistics hulls roll on an EW van, a radar node, a drone magazine, a new dialect. Just assign a bigger job. Scale is the headline. The keel goes down in Franklin, Louisiana. Gulfcraft reborn as Saronic's Rapid MUSV line, backed by roughly $250 million in upgrades, aimed at turning out up to 50 autonomous vessels per year. That's how you heavy hauler into a fleet posture.